Hello and welcome to Emergent. What happens when intelligences interact and worlds begin to collide, either subtly or suddenly, with a possible exosystem of life beyond our world? Tonight, humanity's encounter with non-human intelligence, the biological, psychological, and technological shockwave of first contact.
Seen with my own eyes, non-human craft and non-human beings.
Do we have the bodies of the pilots who piloted this craft?
As I've stated publicly already in my News Nation interview, biologics came with some of these recoveries. Yeah.
Were they, I guess, human or non-human biologics?
Non-human, and that was the assessment of people with direct knowledge on the program I talked to that are currently still on the program.
Non-human intelligence exists. Non-human intelligence has been interacting with humanity. This interaction is not new, and it's been ongoing. And there are unelected people in the government that are aware of that.
Thank you for joining me. My name is Reed Summers. It's a pleasure to host you again here on Emergent. In this episode of Emergent, I'll be stepping back to look at the bigger picture of contact with non-human intelligence that may be taking place. I'll be looking at the nature of this interaction and its implications for the human species, and asking some of the deeper, more interdisciplinary questions, tapping fields such as anthropology and comparative history to look at what are the dynamics at play in a potential first contact scenario with the human species. And even if this is not truly first contact, but yet another step in an age-old contact, it is actually psychologically first contact for those who are coming to see it for the first time. So we'll be exploring that together, and I'm very excited to offer this episode with you after a few weeks on hiatus. It's good to be back in the hot seat with you all again. So the plan for tonight, we're going to look at the dynamics of first contact. We're going to talk about whether we're encountering entities or, and in addition, a whole exosystem of potential life and non-human interests. We'll be examining the biological, psychological, and technological implications of that encounter. And then toward the end, I'd like to revisit the drone mystery saga, which continues to this day, and ask a question which I don't think I've heard others ask, which is, could it be that somewhere inside of this activity of anomalous craft in our skies is NHI trying to shape our perception, either of them or of ourselves, especially surrounding the movement towards greater government transparency and disclosure? And then at the very end, I'll be introducing you to my upcoming course beginning next week on decoding alien intent and announcing a new platform for engagement and community to support that. So with that, let's dive in. And actually, before we dive in, I want to say that tonight's episode, as we discuss all of these parameters of the nature of interaction between potential species, I think this is going to give rise to a new set of emergent qualities in the human experience and in human affairs. And I'm excited that you're here with me on Emergent, the show that is built and purposed to examine the front lines of this interface between intelligences and walk around all dimensions of how this interface with non-human entities and a potential larger exosystem may impact the world that we see and the lives that we live. So this is truly an emergent conversation. Thank you again for being here. Also, please, if you haven't subscribed to the show, you know how to do that. Share the show with others. Find me on X, TikTok, and Instagram. I'm excited to grow the show in 2025. I'll be having some great guests on in the year ahead, and we'll be examining the full scope and suite of this complex, enigmatic phenomenon of contact with non-human intelligence. And then lastly, for tonight's show, please go over to Slido. Take a minute to hit that QR code with your smartphone, or go to the website there and begin to queue up your questions for me. I'll take some questions at the end of tonight's show. You can upvote and downvote the questions of others. So get those questions in the queue, and I look forward to a lively discussion toward the end of tonight's show. So with that, now let's actually dive in. I'd like to share that in this quote by Carl Nell, which you heard in the video roll just now, we see a tremendous and potentially alarming assertion that an interaction is taking place with a non-human intelligence interacting with us in ways that we do not understand in a state of covert operation and in a state of non-disclosure. I'd like to read a quote of Carl saying what he said, and then talk to you about what I see as the urgent necessity to have the conversation that we are going to have. To quote Carl now, "Non-human intelligence exists. Non-human intelligence has been interacting with humanity. This interaction is not new, and it has been ongoing, and there are unelected people in the government that are aware of that." Okay, so an interaction that is long-standing, pervasive, global as it is, and as I know it is, and also one that appears strategic and programmatic in nature, begs us to begin to ask the question of what impact and what influence this interaction is having on human affairs, human systems of thought, of data, of interaction itself, and on human behavior, human bodies and minds. I think it is time that we begin to ask those questions. And I know there are not many people doing that. There's not many people asking, how is this interaction influencing the world that we see? What are the potential intent and motive and agenda that stand behind that interaction? What are the potential outcomes of that? Are there hazards and risks? Is there a potential threat at hand? These are no-go territory for some, but not for me. And I just want to ask, why is that? Why are those questions so difficult for people to ask? Why is it such a no-go territory to question the entities and the impact that they're having on us? I find that very strange. It's almost as if somebody does not want us to be asking those questions and putting forward the potential hard truths that might represent. In my mind, it's frontline questioning. If there is a set of entities, especially if they're physical in nature, if they are non-Earth based and alien to us, that leads us down some very important lines of inquiry as to what their intent might be for this programmatic engagement and what influence it might already be having, given that they come not just themselves, but potentially with the whole exosystem behind them, the larger web of interactions, whether it's commerce and technology, whether it's diplomacy and interspecies rules that govern how worlds interact. They bring that with them potentially. And how that interacts with us could have unknown and unaccounted for hazards that we have not been able to identify and mitigate. And so it's the lack of serious and sober discourse on these most pressing questions that really brought me into this field, that launched this show. That's why I'm offering the course on decoding alien intent next week. I think this is the first and frontline questioning we need to be engaged in. No, we don't have all the evidence to conclusively answer these questions yet, but we have all the evidence we need to begin asking them and the motivation to do so, because there are real indications in this phenomenon that there are hazards at play and potential harm as well to human life and interests. So with that in hand, I think we need to step into this new arena with sobriety and really begin to ask those hard questions, as uncomfortable as they may be. Okay. Now, I know some might be asking, are we talking about physical aliens, like literal aliens? What about other theories that explain the nature and origin of non-human intelligence? What about the interdimensional theory, or the theory that this is non-physical, non-corporeal phenomena, that it might be angelic or demonic, that it might be indigenous to this planetary system, that it might be extratemporal, time traveling? Okay, there are many theories out there. I would assert, and those who follow the show know that I do, that we are engaging with a hard physical phenomenon, that there are so many encounters reported with humanoid creatures and entities with hands, fingers, mouths, eyes, heads, organic looking structures, organs, evolved bodies and morphologies, that we should begin to acknowledge that there is a high probability that there is a physical alien entity present in the larger phenomena of what NHI might represent. And I want to counsel people against losing the forest for the tree, in the sense of like conflating the UFO UAP phenomenon, NHI, as we have observed it, with all phenomena, and expanding so broadly that it obfuscates the whole issue. And now we're just asking questions about the nature of everything and not the nature of what has been observed in this hard physical phenomenon. I would say that we can take this in its component parts. and that we can begin to question this physical alien visitor and keep on the table that other phenomena might be at play here. There might be other non-human intelligences in our space as well. But if we are dealing with a physical alien visitor, those three things, physical, alien, and a visitor, that means we need to begin to frame our consideration within the terms, I believe, of nature and evolution. Okay. So this is an entity whose body and morphology, in my view, indicate a non-Earth origin. And so they originated somewhere else. They engaged in some programmatic intent to visit the Earth, to observe humanity, and to interact with humanity. Why would they do that? What are the potential interests at play? What stake might they take in the world? And is it just them, or are there others? Are there competitive interests at play? We might even expand our frame of reference in the exosystem model to think these may not just be entities from another world. They may be entities collaborating in a multi-species organization. And there could be multiple such organizations at play with competing intents. It could be that complex. And so as we examine this together, I invite you to expand out of maybe more simplistic models of angels and demons, of good aliens and bad aliens, of, one entity or one race that gave rise to humanity and they're coming back, something very simplistic, to begin to open the frame of reference within yourself to entertain the possibility we might be dealing with a larger system of forces and trends and dynamics at play, and that might account for some of the complexity and the diversity of what's been reported in this phenomenon. Okay, sip of tea, and then we'll dive in further. So I'd like to examine the frontiers where this interaction with non-human intelligence is taking place, and specifically look at the biological implications, the psychological implications, and the technological implications. We imagine our Earth right here existing in a vacuum of space. We might imagine it as a closed system, an environment in and of itself. But really, it is possible that it exists in a larger super environment, that it is simply one ecosystem within that larger environment. Now, the Earth ecosystem we might call the human habitat. This is where humanity resides. And if we look here, there is some sort of boundary layer or layers between this ecosystem and the ecosystems beyond. Clearly, the vacuum of space does produce some boundary layer with effect, but there might be others. There might be one that is psychological in nature, exopolitical in nature, exoeconomic in nature. We don't fully know. And I think we need to begin to ask, what are these boundaries and what is transiting from the exosystem into our Earth system? Okay. So here's our planet, our beautiful gem in the universe. It's all we've ever known. It is the sum and total of the existence we experience. And for some, they don't even imagine a universe beyond it. Little do we know, it is simply one small world. And around it might exist various spheres of influence, various ecological niches in which various organisms have found a place and a purpose and a participation with other forms of life. So little do we know that our Earth might exist in such a complex playing field of interests and interactions, some of which may be competitive in nature. And I think it's time to begin to think in those terms. And this is part of, coming back to myself here, this is part of the psychology of first contact. Though contact may not be wholly new to this moment, for many of us, it is psychologically very new. And so we might be predisposed to think of it in certain terms that really blind us from the nature of what's going on. We might see ourselves as the center of the narrative of contact when we might be somewhat incidental to some who are visiting this planet. We may see ourselves as inordinately special or unique or of interest, when disinterest may be the predominant attitude towards us and may be the greatest threat towards us as well. We'll see. So as we begin to expand into this exosystemic view or model of life, I think we need to begin to ask some considerable questions as to the nature of this interaction with non-human intelligence taking place. And here I would propose, are we experiencing something of a cosmic Colombian exchange? The Colombian exchange was a vast interspecies encounter that brought organisms from previously isolated continents together, and this presented a biological collision that reshaped ecosystems and populations with both mutual benefit and devastating consequences. This is after Christopher Columbus's voyages to the Americas in 1492. And this deals with the transfer of viruses and bacteria, of technologies, of thought systems, and much more that revolutionized life, mostly on behalf of the less developed civilization on the receiving end, which was in the Americas. But it also did revolutionize life in the old world as well. So, are we engaged in some kind of exchange with these entities who are in visitation and in interaction? What are we taking in from their system? And what are we losing? What are we giving out from ours to them? You know, there's some wisdom in life here. Anticipated benefit often brings unexpected hazard. We might imagine that we're going to receive planet healing technology from beyond, or higher levels of consciousness, or we're going to engage with beings who have transcended the need for conflict and war. These are assumptions. Little do we know, I don't doubt that there is real hazard in this interaction, if not only due to how humans respond to it. Okay, so this is the sobriety that we need when we begin to consider this. You know, take the human anthill as an analogy. You know, the greatest threat to an anthill might be a careless hiker or a boisterous toddler that wants to stomp all over it. It's not necessarily that it's an evil entity in visitation or in interaction. It might be indifferent. It might not value what we consider to be our fundamental human value. It might want what we have. It might view certain aspects of consciousness or biology that are endemic on this planet as unique and harvestable in some fashion. So there are many things that might be at play here. And here I go back to one of my favorite books from high school, Guns, Germs, and Steel by Jared Diamond. This is funny. I queried ChatGPT, give me the Guns, Germs, and Steel version of NHI interacting with humanity. And therein lies the problem, folks, right there. You know, ChatGPT is built off of human inputs. And, you know, we humans, we look out there and we envision it's all going to be, if it's not death and destruction, right, and lasers and warfare and so on and so forth, it's got to be something transcendental and far beyond. And this is part of what obfuscates our view of what might be happening. We might be dealing with a natural universe of natural forces, of species that are in some state of mutual collaboration or contest and conflict over limited resources, limited habitable spaces. And here we human beings exist on this beautiful gem of a planet that we happen to be destroying in the 20th century, the very century when this phenomenon became so pervasive and global. And we don't understand the ground underneath our feet. I think of the natives of the New World. Same thing for them. They didn't know the value of their environment, that as it would be perceived by those from another environment in that encounter, that interspecies encounter. Now we might be dealing with a multiple species encounter, and we don't know what they value. We don't know what interests are at play. We imagine that, you know, if they come from another planet, that they would come this far, you know, they would have no interest in anything to do with the Earth. They can transit the stars. They have unlimited power and have mastered certain domains of science and knowledge to do so. We can't imagine what they would want with us. And that lack of imagination, I think, could present a blind spot that is not favorable for humanity. And so, you know, as we think of the guns, germs, and steel kind of framing of the colonial encounter, you know, what are the equivalent of smallpox, gunpowder, and exotic metals as the New World natives experience them? You know, potentially for us, that's, instead of smallpox, it's viral technological systems. It's synthetic systems that spread virally in this new habitat called Earth. On the gunpowder side, maybe it's psychic power, or the ability to psychically manipulate a new source of power to impress force, if willed to do so. And as for metal, well, how about metamaterials, right? These exotic materials that stem from reported recovered craft that could revolutionize human engineering and human technological systems, but in ways that disrupt the global order, then that empower a whole new level of oligarchy and authoritarian control of human on human. So again, in this Colombian exchange at a cosmic level, we may be taking things in that we are not accounting for that fundamentally and forever alter the fabric of human affairs. And it's time to begin asking, what are those risks? Should we be engaging with technologies of non Earth origin widely and openly without any oversight? Should we be assuming that psychic encounters and relationship formation with NHI is a good idea for most people to begin to do? Can we be making those assumptions when we know so little about the entities in our space? Okay, so onward, I think there are other hazards at play in this potential exchange between our ecosystem and the larger exosystem. There is the risk of contamination. I never hear people talk about that. What is the risk of viral contamination or synthetic contamination into our human space? And you could put technology into that synthetic basket of potential manufactured materials or components of technology that could be introduced into our world that spread like wildfire, or that fundamentally alter who has power in the world via the access to data or the manipulation of data. We've given over our species data set already, probably by transmitting technological signals into space. And any astute observer could have been observing us for hundreds of years, thousands of years potentially, even pre-technologically, to gain so much information about us that they could produce predictive models that would operate in the world in ways that we would not be able to account for and manage and maintain. So, contamination is a potential risk. Invasive organic or synthetic entities. There is some speculation as to the nature of some of these entities being semi-biological, semi-synthetic. What is the implication of these entities in our space? It's a question. Is NHI a potential invasive species themselves? It's a question. What might tailgate in through the door behind them that they may trail in from the exosystem right into our planetary sphere? It's a question. We assume that they would manage that on our behalf, that they would do this with due diligence for human interests. That's an assumption. I'm not sure that that's the case. So these are some questions about, the hazards of a new species or set of species transiting over the boundary layer that demarcates our habitat from the larger environment in which it might exist. And we need to begin asking the questions. What is entering this Earth human system? Many species, apex species at least, have some kind of instinctual awareness as to their, quote, territory, the environmental space they need to reproduce, to hunt, and they have an instinctual response when that territory is being violated, when there's an entity in that space that shouldn't be there or hasn't been there. And I wonder, do human beings have that same instinctual response at all or not at all? Because I don't hear it spoken to very often. That's a question. And I think, we need some territorial room to exist as a species. And we need to begin to articulate, what is that sovereign domain? What is that necessary human territory? And what are the implications of unidentified craft, of incursions, of humanoid encounters, and more taking place in ways that we cannot monitor or mitigate? This is a question for us to begin to consider. I want to step back for a minute. I know some might be thinking, okay, this sounds like, this sounds maybe logical. This sounds nature, informed by insights from nature. But we may not be dealing with an entity that's just arriving. It may be here, has been here for a long time. It may be co-indigenous to the Earth. Some have theorized that. This may be an ever-present phenomenon. There's no uptick recently. It's always been interacting with humanity. It's in our religions, our scriptures, etc. And I just want to just speak to that for a minute. I do believe there is a distinct modern wave of visitation taking place. I think it's in the historical record. I don't think the scant sources within ancient scripture, cave art, Renaissance paintings, and so forth give us enough of an indication that an entity that might have been there then is the same entity that is here now. I don't doubt that visitation may have occurred in ancient times, that observation might be in continuance for hundreds or thousands of years. But how do we assume that the entities that are interacting now are those that are referenced back then and in sources with much less veracity for us to analyze and consider? I think that's a very difficult association to make. Um, we have poor capabilities to analyze historic ancient astronaut cases, and the quality of reports is also not high, and it doesn't comport or map on top of the kind of behavior that we see taking place in the world now. These are not the same kind of interactions as reported historically as are being reported now. In some cases, they might be, but not at a global level, at a whole phenomenon level, in my view. So I do think we are being interacted with in a modern wave of some form of visitation to the world. For those who take my course, we'll get into what I call the human Earth context as one way to analyze the intent of these entities. And notable things have happened in the 20th century. It is an unparalleled 100-year span in the history of this planet. And in terms of the destruction of the Earth's environment, the development of nuclear weapons, and so forth, there is plenty cause for some entities from our exosystem to suddenly want to get involved. So I just wanted to speak to that because I know that the ancient contact seems to always beckon to the mind to say, well, yes, but it's always been here. And I would say, who is the they that we think has always been here? There might be thousands of entities that have visited, and there might be a half dozen who are here now who only got in the game for more modern reasons. I'd like to touch on the psychological side of this frontier encounter with non-human intelligence. What is the psychology of first contact psychology or mentality? I think this is very much under the skin right now as we look out onto the universe and project our human values out onto whatever we believe might be there. And also as we look to our own human sources of knowledge, be it scripture or present day understanding of human origins, to understand who these entities might be within the context of who we understand ourselves to be. There is a rush to write these entities into the human origin story, the scriptural origins of religions, to say, look, they've always been here. Look, it's the same thing happening. And this has been ever present. And I just, I think there's some risk there of this is the predisposition of a native people looking at something anomalous and saying it's always been in our environment, or the opposite truly is actually in effect as well. It cannot exist. And the inability to perceive the event taking place, I would say, has to be the most common form of first contact psychology at play. It is in plain sight, and how few people can see it as even being substantive enough for them to be worried about or concerned about. Seemingly very few. But there's also the inverse of that, which is seeing it as always here and always all around us, which may not actually be the case. There is this dynamic of discovery and being discovered, the discovered and the discoverer. And I wonder what exosystemic doctrines of discovery exist out there. What is the imperative that would cause another form of life to enter a programmatic engagement with our form of life and to do what they have been observed to be doing in their operation in the world? So it's a question, what is that doctrine of discovery? I think there are some signs and signals in the nature of how NHI has interacted with humanity that we should pay close attention to. They are acutely and astutely interested in the psychic side of human life and interacting with people in that way. There has been seemingly an intention to directly engage people individually, even as much as government or other power centers, but also to engage power centers, the defense and military industrial complexes of the major superpowers of the world. There are some indications there that might reveal the doctrine of discovery that might be at play. One thing I would say is in this psychology of first contact, we have to acknowledge that there is a cognitive event taking place. It is perceptual. It is us perceiving them and them perceiving us. And it is a meeting of minds. Now, this could be taking place at the level of information exchange and communication, or at a truly psi or telepathic level. But with wherever it's happening, there is inevitably going to be some kind of contest of intents and purposes. Okay, we cannot assume that they would share our intent, our value structure, what we deem to be the purpose of life, how we have organized our societies based on these ancient principles as to the nature of the divine, or what has arisen due to complex societies in a post hunter gatherer phase of human life. These things have organically arisen for us. We cannot assume that they just share them with us. And so there will be some kind of meeting of minds, meeting of intents. And I think we need to begin to think about that. Um, what happens when a truly non-human intelligence begins to function and operate in this earthly system that we're in? Um, is there some kind of distortion of the psychic space, which may not even be the intent of the more advanced entity? It might be a downstream outcome of their psychology to generate psychic force, and we might be comparatively quite weak in that regard. And so, how might that influence, whether passive or targeted, be shaping the way human beings see the universe, themselves, human history, that kind of thing? I think we need to begin to look at that. And then let's turn to look at the technological encounter on these frontiers of engaging non-human intelligence. What on earth, might I ask, is going on with non-human tech? There's a lot of conversation about floating orbs and hieroglyphics and gauntlets and eggs and off-world technology written on doors and deep underground facilities. Um, I've shared this quote by Carl Nell as well. Technology of unknown origin is likely technology of unknown ramification. I would fully agree with that. And so if these technologies are appearing in our world and being ingested by our techno systems, wow. I mean, we have to begin to seriously look at how that might fundamentally alter the nature of those systems. And I would ask here, is that an accidental depositing of technology? Are these truly crashes? Vehicles just crashed, or were they brought down, or were they deposited intentionally? And if so, are they gifts, or are they some kind of technological Trojan horse, or control system, or testing mechanism to test our responses to them? So we have to begin to ask these questions. There's no miraculous barrier now that separates us from them. We can't have it nice and clean and neat and tidy, where yes, we're interacting with NHI, but it's on our timeline. It's according to our interest and inquiry. It's our adventure into the nature of life in the universe. We cannot assume that this is on our terms. And so that if we're acknowledging that NHI is interacting with humanity, that interaction has to be seriously considered, and the risks and hazards have to be identified, and we have to begin to articulate, how do we mitigate those risks and hazards, really? I think we need to do that, especially in light of this purported arms race that many people have begun to speak about over technologies of non-Earth origin. Is that entirely accidental? Is that just humans doing what humans do? Or is there some intent to generate an arms race over such technologies, to basically divvy up the benefit to different players, make deals and agreements, transact for things on Earth, whether that be access to the population or specific biological resources or what have you? We have to investigate and alter what this introduction of non-human technologies might do to our human systems. I think it's becoming urgent. And I know I'm in a minority position on this topic of NHI tech. Most people are very positive or pro and encouraging of it. Going back to the Colombian exchange, yes, gunpowder and horses and other forms of technology were introduced to the New World natives. They were transacted for, and they were used. And they divided in ways the natives had never seen before. And this has happened so many times in human history. You look at the British Empire's use of opium to corrupt and undermine leadership in Asia. You look at just how various resources have been introduced into native environments, be it alcohol or gunpowder and firearms and things like that, and basically are used as a tool to undermine the sovereignty and the resilience of the native population. Ideas as well. I think of the Mayan example, where in the Spanish colonies on Mayan in the former Mayan Empire, the undermining of native origin stories and value systems and religious scripture was done very overtly. The seeding of Christian narratives done very overtly, which placed, of course, tremendous power in the hands of the visitors, because as ones who have that connection to that God or that book or that sacred text, it is presumed that everything else they might do is driven by such high moral or ethical imperatives. Those might be dangerous assumptions for a native society to make. But we do the same thing. This is the thing, is we are engaged in first contact psychological encounters right now. And the human population is about to blow into that at a much larger level with disclosure. People are going to begin to think about, well, my gosh, if these entities can engage psychically with people, or appear to have angelic qualities, or appear to be working in the language of Scripture, in the language of my faith, maybe these entities, represent that God. Maybe they are that God, or maybe they are one with that God, even if they are physical. And so these assumptions will start to run. And this is where I think we need this grounded, level-headed assessment of the universe as nature having fundamental forces at play that have sculpted the fabric of life on Earth among billions of organisms, and that we should use that as first line thinking when we interface with this idea of NHI, that we're in a naturalistic universe of species engaging and competing for environment and resources. And we are not excluded from that potential exosystemic natural engagement. In fact, we might be looking at it right in front of us, even though this is a meeting of sentiences. Okay, so it's not simple organisms competing literally for caloric resources on the bottom of the ocean floor. These are sentiences, creative, manipulative, capable of potentially, in the case of NHI, psychic engagement. And so we can't just assume that this is head-on kinetic, and that if they're not attacking us, then they must be beyond our dimension or spiritual in nature. They may, as I'll get into in a minute here, have basically discovered technologies of mind, technologies to interface with a psychic or mental plane of existence. We would be remiss to assume, though, that is where their fundamental nature and being exists. Okay, and I want to talk on this because there seems to be this stiff resistance right now to the extraterrestrial hypothesis of NHI origin. I watched part of the Soul Forum roundtable today, and the moderator asked a question, which he framed as, groundbreaking or controversial. And the question was to the three speakers present, what do you think UAP are? I thought that was kind of comical. Like, is it that groundbreaking to ask people what it is, to just say it? I don't think so. But I guess it was in this case. And, Hal Puthoff was the second to be asked. And, he walked around the ETH like it was, something you just do not touch. Extratemporal, cryptoterrestrial. And okay, there are some indications that might, lead to that theory having some being worth entertaining. But the extraterrestrial hypothesis just has so much more, and it would not be spoken to. It would be avoided like the plague. And I wonder about that. Why is that? Why are we so allergic to thinking that we exist in a universe of natural forces, that we're interacting with entities with evolved biological structures, and that it might have to do with planet or people and the resources therein? That to me is a very plausible first line assessment. Not to say it accounts for everything, but from there we can branch out into some new arenas, like the psychological, the psi side, which is to say, we humans already possess, I believe, the ability to engage in a psi plane of existence, a psi level interaction with each other. Okay. We already have drugs that can alter our neurology, our psychology, and our consciousness. So, though we are physical, we can still alter consciousness and potentially interact with consciousness outside a purely physical framework of life. Why then, when NHI seem to demonstrate the ability, psi abilities, do we just leap to this assumption that they must not be physical, right? It's like, well, why would we leap to that with ourselves? Like, I'm physical, and yet my consciousness can do things that may transcend my physical body and its organ systems, etc. So that NHI have taken that to 1,000 degrees would mean that they have technologies that can interface with a psychic plane of existence, and that might be their primary mode of interaction, of communication, or of getting their needs and interests met. And so we're in this very confused position right now, where we cannot acknowledge the physical nature of the entities because they are demonstrating non-physical capabilities. And I want to anchor us into the reality that physical entities can engage in non-physical activities. I'm doing it right now. I'm having a consciousness experience, right? And if they scan my brain, I doubt they would find a biological basis for literally the experience I'm having. Okay, so I think we've got our wires crossed here in some strange ways. Okay, let's step up and out to look at what this exosystem might entail. How is this exosystem interacting with us? Are there exosystemic forces at play? Here I go to the analogy of stellar forces. Stellar forces are acting upon our Earth all the time. We are being bombarded with particles from our sun that would be very damaging to life, that would irradiate us as organisms and wipe out our atmosphere and evaporate the oceans of the world over time. And so there are exosystemic forces operating at that stellar level. Are there such forces at a sentient level? And I would take this at both a physical and non-physical. Could there be psi level exosystemic forces operating in our world? Exopolitical, exosocial, exoeconomic, exoenvironmental. We need to begin to ask ourselves how the system at large, the environment, is impacting this ecosystem and the ecological niche which humanity plays in this ecosystem. This is a bigger picture view of the situation, which I think is important to begin to entertain. In the analogy of first contact with native peoples in this world, we might be dealing with something of a continental complexity at play. We think we're being visited by 1 or 2 or 10 entities, and they're all totally isolated from each other. They're siloed. They come from other worlds, we might imagine, or other planes of existence or other dimensions. We might imagine that too. And we don't account for the fact that there might be competitive multi-entity interests at play in our world. And I think this is where we need to go. We need to level up outside of just this kind of 1.0 view of human on alien, and they're either good or bad, to human on exosystem, and that the exosystem might have these endemic social, economic, political interests at play, and that we have done something. We have kicked the tripwire in the 20th century to do something to pique a new level of interest in our world or in our species, and that interest might generate interests. We talk about national interests, national security interests, which presuppose taking a stake in a certain dynamic engagement. My country might have a national security interest in another part of the world, and it wants to develop a sphere of influence there. And it's going to engage economic forces and try to set up politicians and alter the landscape of the indigenous environment to meet its interests. I think we need to begin to think in those terms. There may be interests at play. And, when I look at the historical record of NHI, it is often reported by those who claim these interactions to see multiple types of entities operating together in a multi-species setting. And so that is worth taking into account. Might there be hierarchies of different collaborating entities in organizations that are basically here for some interest, whether it's biology, planetary interest, strategic position, or the psi consciousness capabilities of this sentient apex species that exists here? I think all are possibilities. But I have often said that, in a world of potentially scarce environment and resource, a non-post scarcity universe, value brings visitation, and destruction of value may bring intervention. So if we are destroying value, habitable, usable value, in the eyes and interests of others, that might bring some kind of involvement into our world, and some intent to alter or adjust the nature of the human fabric so that that prefers outcomes that NHI would want to see happen. So we need to begin to think about that. So it's not just entities; it's ecosystem. It's not time to begin talking not just about agendas, but forces and collaborative interests and competitive interests. And I think this is kind of a next level to the conversation that I don't hear spoken to very often. And so, if there are forces and interests out there, if they are at play in our world in a programmatic, strategic manner over a long period of time, as the phenomenon indicates, I think we have to begin to look at influence and impact. Okay. Because I just don't believe that our human fabric would remain the same with such an entity or set of forces operating in our space. And so, we have to begin to look at what kind of influence and impact that might have upon us. And, this is part of my work, is assessing the nature of that influence and impact by understanding intent. If you don't understand intent, it's going to be very difficult to go downstream to understand the nature of the influence and its impact, because creating a causal link between factors and forces in the human space with NHI is going to be inevitably extremely difficult to do. And I do counsel people to be very cautious about, drawing conclusions as to, well, the NHI are behind this, or they're setting up a government, or they're behind a world leader, or they created this technology. Very difficult to create that causal link. But when you know or have a sense of what intent might be, you can begin to understand the final conditions that a certain force or interest might want to see take place. If it's more control, less creative thinking, more homogeny, if it is a more disturbed or disrupted global system, things like that, then you can begin to look at some of the forces and trends underway and begin to ask intelligent questions as to the nature of the influence that NHI could potentially have there. And I know this is frontier territory for some. Some would call this wanton speculation. I would call it necessary speculation. I think the nice, comfortable era where we get to observe shiny objects in the sky and study them on our own terms, on our own timeline, is over. I think we are interacting with a set of forces which have an intent, which is birthing an interest, and which ultimately might take the shape of a stake, a stated or a more permanent interest that is operative in the world. And so we have to understand what our own intent is as a human species and set ourselves in a position to negotiate our intent with theirs. And if we have no starting reference points regarding what and who and why they're here and all the who, what, why, how questions, if we're nowhere with those, we're going to be in a very disadvantaged position. And so I would argue that we have numerous indications and data, points of data from the phenomenon itself, giving us indication as to what and why and how it has involved itself in the world, probably. Not with final conclusivity, but probably. And I think we need to begin to move from possibilities to probabilities and begin to make that starting assessment of what is taking place. Because with that, then we can go collect our data. Not randomly, not the data that they just wish to give us or allow us to collect. No, we go collect the targeted data that we need to make more conclusive statements about intent. So this is part of the project that I think needs to get underway. How do we do this? How do we begin to devise an interpretive model or an intent framework to understand the nature of the interaction, but also the nature of the relationship that is forming with NHI? Because interaction over time with intent, I would say, is the shaping of a relationship. And you better understand the relationships you get into in life, right? That's common wisdom. You don't want to walk backwards into a marriage. Easy to get in, hard to get out. And so understanding the other is a very important part of the relationship formation phase. And informed consent, both parties, and disclosure of intent, both parties, is very important to the formation of an honest, trustworthy, and stable relationship. I don't see NHI giving us the opportunity to form such a relationship. They seem to be doing what they're doing without a whole lot of regard for human interests, human agency in this formation of a relationship. Again, they're not us, but they are operating in our space. And so this is where I would advocate a human-centered approach. We need to be thinking like humans with our human interests in mind for beneficial human outcomes. If we don't do it, we can't assume anyone in the universe is going to do it for us. And we cannot assume that their interest and intent, their value structure is inherently better than ours. We don't have indications of that, I would say. We have claims of that. There are communications claiming that they are more enlightened or that they come from, a higher plane of existence and so forth. How do we corroborate those claims? This is the negotiating table of the future, folks. I mean, this is the meeting of two life forms on the territorial habitat of this human species. And we need to begin thinking in the human interest and toward better human outcomes. Because if we don't, there may not be good human outcomes. So how do we do this? Well, I think we need to begin looking at the encounters themselves. What is the nature of what is reported about these beings? What do they do? What do they say? What are their mannerisms? How do they conduct themselves? What are their hierarchies like as reported by those who have encountered them? And then what is the context in which those encounters have taken place? Spatial, temporal, circumstantial, time, place, human events. What was taking place in the same space as those events? That's also very important data for us to take into account as we begin to build an interpretive model, or as I would call it, an intent framework, to decode the intent of the entities for the purpose of human response. I think there are certain flags and signs of concern, and then there are also certain trust indicators that we can identify to say, in this kind of encounter, if NHI does this or says this or operates in this way, that would be a trust building indicator. If they do this over here, that would be a concern or a flag. And so building such a flowchart is a project of the present for myself. And I think we're going to need something to keep us honest in this encounter, some rubric, lest we give over just a blind trust and act out of our own species' low self-esteem to say, screw us, let's embrace them. They'll do better on the planet than we have. Team alien. And I hear that sentiment a lot. And that's very concerning to me. It actually brings up this question of the information space. In this Colombian exchange, what is the information being transited from us to them and them to us? Is there any sort of shaping of not the battle space, but the thought space? It's been discussed that the indications of the phenomenon are ones that might suggest IPB, initial preparation for battle. Well, what about initial preparation for thought battle, information war? And there is a plethora of purported alien communications out there that are spreading like wildfire and that people seem to want to believe at face value without any sort of system by which to measure their authenticity, whether they advocate the right things for human interests, whether they rewrite human origins in ways that would debase our native traditions or our native sense of value. I don't see people using any sort of framework like that. It's either believe or reject. And so I think we need to get more disciplined in how we interact with those sources of information. So, as we look at the scenario at play in this interaction between intelligences, this potential Colombian exchange between civilizations, this meeting or collision of systems, the Earth ecosystem and the alien exosystem, I think we need to take into account certain high probability scenarios. I think one scenario, I'll just list these out. These come to mind for me. I think there is an observe and monitor scenario, and some of the phenomenon comports to that. I think there is a grab and go scenario, which is come, grab biology, resources, make some tests, and go and use that for purposes that we don't understand. There might be a cohabitate and collaborate scenario, which is an actual intention to come reside here on some permanent basis and work with humanity. That might also take other forms that are less that are more concerning for human interests, like alter and integrate. So yes, cohabitate and collaborate, but not happy with the standard 1.0 Apex human. We would like a 1.1 version, please, or a 2.0 version. And that's the alter and integrate, which is to really bring our human infrastructure, societally, technologically, communication infrastructure, what have you, into an exosystemic infrastructure that we might plug into their world. And is it possible that the rapid technological advances that seem to be out of control and not always acting or moving forward in our best interests might be some attempt to seed such technologies to ease us along in a way that we can plug into some larger hierarchy or exosystem of technology? It's possible. So, and then last, I think, on the table as well is an eliminate and replace scenario. Of course, NHI do not seem to be doing that now or have any intent to eliminate overtly, but through time and genetic interventions and psychological conditioning, you will ultimately have a different kind of human. It's yet to be conclusively determined on behalf of society whether that is happening or not, but I think we need to know. There's enough claims of undisclosed medical procedures in close human contact with NHI that you begin to wonder, is this reproductive in nature? Is it genetic in nature, right? Is there some kind of or psychic reconditioning going on? Because many people claim to be altered mentally or emotionally after these events, and not just in the way of trauma or having a beneficial experience, fundamentally altered, possibly even in their brain structures, okay? So is there a reconditioning project underway? We have to be asking these questions. It's responsibility to be asking them. Otherwise, we could wake up in 20 or 50 or 100 years and the original human is no longer in existence. We went extinct. Because, that is partly what the historical record shows in species interaction. Species interact, they compete, they adapt, and some, if not many, are eliminated in the process. The same could happen to us, and not because there's any evil intent involved. It's competitive, and it's driven by the competitive trends at play in a natural universe, a universe of nature. So we don't even have to get into malevolence here or benevolence. It's simply nature playing out. And so I think this is really important to consider. I'd like to, as I begin to kind of close up on that, go back to this information war scenario and ask this question, which I don't see anybody else asking, regarding the most visible instance of anomalous activity in the world in recent months, which is the mystery drone incursions that have been taking place here in the United States and in Europe and actually all around the world. These are still taking place. We do not have conclusive answers as to who or what was behind them. And I think there are some indications that something very strange and potentially non-human is at play. And I'd like to play this clip for you, and then I'm going to break this apart and share with you some indications that have come across my screen.
We're not able to track them. We're not able to see where they originate.
No, it's a capability gap. Certainly, they can come and go from any direction. The FBI is looking at potential options. It certainly could have a foreign nexus, a threat nexus. They could be doing anything from surveilling critical infrastructure, just to the point of embarrassing us from the fact that they can do this on a day-to-day basis, and that we're not able to do anything about it.
We're the most powerful military on the face of the earth, and yet drones could fly over a major Air Force base, and we couldn't stop them. How is that possible?
Well, I think the threat got ahead of our ability to detect and track the threat.
You know, when we hear things from the White House that it's not deemed a threat, it seems to me that this is alarming. I mean, this is kind of hair on fire time.
It is alarming, and I would say that our hair is on fire here in Northcom in a controlled way, and we're moving out extremely quickly.
Republican Senator Roger Wicker of Mississippi is chairman of the Armed Services Committee that oversees the Pentagon. We talked to him this past December. Do you believe that these drones are a spying system, a spying platform?
What would a logical person conclude?
That these are
Yes.
spying incursions.
And yet, I can tell you, I am privy to classified briefings at the highest level. I think the Pentagon and the national security advisors are still mystified.
Still mystified.
Yes.
Okay. This is 60 Minutes on the drone incursions, I believe, from last week. I watched this and I looked at some of this testimony, looked at those facial expressions of these individuals who are deeply involved in national security interests. They're aware of what's up in the sky. They're aware of military capabilities. Look at their body language. Okay. I have heard from others that high tier class 1 drone operators and drone manufacturers, people in those spaces are reportedly, that they don't know what this is. That they're bringing out their kit, their jamming equipment, their surveillance equipment. They're trying to down these craft. They cannot jam them. They cannot down them. Okay. This is not even just months in. This is years in. In my last episode, I interviewed Chris Grooms about a series of anomalous aerial vehicle incidents in Nebraska in 2019. And following that period, there have been spates of these bizarre drone swarms over military sites in this country, at least, and elsewhere in the world. And then, of course, it ramped up tremendously. Interestingly, weeks after the last set of UFO hearings in Congress, weeks after the election, and weeks before the inauguration of a new federal administration, which has decidedly communicated their intent to disclose information about UAP. And so I think there are some indications there. I've also talked to UAP researchers, field researchers, who have shown me footage of some of the craft that they have captured on thermal cameras and other multi-sensor collection platforms of spheroids, of very strange craft performing in bizarre ways, being able to cloak themselves in and out, and that in some cases it was actually more drone-like craft, quadcopter, that kind of thing, that was actually pursuing these spheroids or appearingly trying to drive them off. Okay, so I would say that there is the potential. We have a genuine UAP activity behind this drone activity. I don't think all of it is UAP, for sure not. Misidentification, over-reporting, reporting the same thing, multiple people, is most certainly at play. There's, I think, obviously a prosaic craft up in the sky, but what's up in the sky above those prosaic craft? This is a question. Okay, we're at a tenuous moment when the declassification of federal records regarding unidentified anomalous phenomena may come out for the first time in history, in ways that have never come out in the past. And so I introduced this question, which I don't hear anyone else asking. Is there the potential that some kind of psychological operation is being conducted, not by the government, not by a foreign adversary, not by defense contractors, but by genuine UAP activity controlled by a non-human intelligence? I think it's time to begin asking that question because there are other signs and signals that such a thing might be happening. I go back to Jeremy Corbell. Several months ago, he released kind of a sensational clip in which he said he's been told by people inside the government that the claim that they are coming in 2036 is the PSYOP. Okay. Now, if you're not aware, there is this claim that NHI, there's going to be some mass reveal, mass appearance in the 2030s. Some even say it's 2027, 7 years. I'm sorry, 2017, 20. Okay, yeah, 10 years after Lou Elizondo came out, 2017, in the New York Times articles. Okay, so a lot of speculation about this. I heard that from Jeremy Corbell, and I thought that was interesting because I think there's two possible elements of narrative manipulation. We've not been here and we're coming, or we've always been here. And I hear people pushing these really strong. And in my mind, they are not corroborated by the evidential record of the phenomenon. Okay. This phenomenon is not only about to start happening in the 2030s or now or since November, right, with this massive spate of sightings. It has been, for anyone who's a student of it, pervasive, global, and many parameters of what's been reported have been consistent over time in terms of shape, size, shape movement, craft size, craft movement, and so forth. Likewise, this claim that they've always been here and that they're, in essence, indigenous to the human space. We don't have to be worried about it. They're an element of our reality. Just go pick up your Bible or your Quran. I think that smacks of some kind of narrative manipulation as well. I get entertaining it for a time, but it is being pushed heavily. This persistent UAP theory that they have been a part of our world since before time. And of course, here it comes, that they created our religions, that they engineered our cultures, that they've controlled bloodlines and power structures throughout history. What does that do to your sense of orientation to humanity's existence in the universe? What does that do to your sense of empowerment as a human being? If an NHI has essentially been controlling the entire human journey all along, right? And so there are these narratives regarding presence and power. When they came, when they came, or will come, and the degree of power they have held, or the degree of power they cannot wield because there are evil human entities and bad governments in the way. Okay, so power and presence. It seems to be this this point of contention in the psychological space. And here I had queued up, but I can't play it, the three body problem clip, right? Which is they're coming, but in 400 years. So we got time. It's like, what's that about? More to say on that, but not time tonight. There's definitely this good ET, bad ET, this good cop, bad cop thing going on, which is, yeah, there's bad ones, but the good ones are here to save us from those. And the bad, we evicted the bad ones. They're gone now. And now only the good ones are here. It's infinite, the ways in which the information space can be manipulated. And there seems to be very minimal corroboration or attempt to corroborate these claims. And I think, we have to develop capabilities to detect and track UAP at a societal level. I'm shocked that the military itself is unable to do so. Although if they're UAP, I'm not so shocked. How is it that we cannot detect low flying craft? Right. How many decades are we into the era of drones? Right. And come on. So I think this we just haven't developed the capability yet. Give us a minute. That is itself a sign that we are dealing with something anomalous in the sky, if that's the case. But back to the information space, it is just infinite the way the story can be spun in any direction regarding when they came, how they came, who they're interacting with, who the good ones are, who the bad ones are. And people are at sea in assessing this phenomenon. And it's a major concern of mine. And so I wonder, is there a preparation of the thought space, not the battle space, the thought space? And, might we wake up one day and, disclosure ended up happening, but it was controlled by an intelligence not of our own? Okay. It's possible. It's possible many forms of social engineering are being undertaken in ways that we cannot account for. And so I know this is speculative, might sound speculative. To me, it's responsible questioning. The phenomenon demands it. The nature of what has been documented suggests that there is a persistent, strategic, programmatic presence in our world. And as such, it could be operating on many different planes in human society and in the human psyche. And so we have to begin asking the question, and asking the further question is, what would we do about that? How would we begin to identify forms of NHI influence and ultimately mitigate those? Is there the potential for some kind of psi shielding individually? I think there is. Collectively or small group level, I think there could be. Are there technologies that could help with that? Possibly. I think we have to change the operating conditions for NHI. We have to test them and see how they respond when suddenly it becomes a little bit harder to fly over cities and populated areas. We have to develop capabilities to change the operating conditions and see how they respond and collect data on that. And so this is one of my passion projects, and we can talk more at another date about it. But we stand at this potential cusp of the disclosure of non-human intelligence to larger groups, larger portions of the human family. And all of a sudden, there's this anomalous activity in the sky. And, it's evident that the government is not in a position to disclose fully, not yet, maybe not ever. And is it possible that this craft is being, that UAP are operating in ways that would cause catastrophic disclosure in ways the government could not handle and are using that as leverage, causing them to throw up their own craft to obfuscate the nature of what's going on, to cloud the skies, so to speak. And are they forcing the hand of government in some sense, which is to say, we know you can't disclose. And so let's do this. Let's put this up in the sky to create a controversy that we know you won't honestly respond to, so that when you do disclose, people won't even believe you when you do, right? I mean, there are all sorts of tactics like those could be at play. And I think it's just time to start asking the question and seriously considering the UAP NHI factor in various equations on the world stage, the political stage, the economic stage. We may be operating within an exosystem of forces and interests that might at some point, for any number of reasons, choose to take a stake in the human space and fundamentally alter what is happening here on Earth in ways that are not good for human interests. So it's a potential that we have to take into consideration and account for. So with that, I'd like to turn over to Slido and take your questions. And if you haven't gone there yet, we'll get the link in the chat. Please take a minute to upvote, downvote, and I will get that on screen here. And we will see what is on your mind. Okay. So let's go to the first question here. Do you have a perspective on how AI might fit into NHI and consciousness? Okay. Well, like I said earlier, I don't think it is a responsible line of connection to draw that AI is created by NHI or is fully an NHI ploy. I mean, there's been data collection and machine learning for many decades here on Earth. And so it's an existing trend. However, if we begin to understand that NHI, if they wanted to influence affairs on the ground, if they are a numerically inferior force to our own, if they have transited space-time to get here, which means there's some kind of supply chain or there's some logistical challenge in maintaining their presence here, even if it's minor, then they might want to influence us in the most efficient ways possible. They might want to use locally sourced technologies and systems to influence thought and behavior among large populations, such that they don't have to do that, with as much effort themselves. And this is where I look at where AI is going. It's interesting. I said to myself today, I was thinking, it's interesting how big data, the whole trendy thing of how it's all about data, preceded the whole trendy thing about it's all about AI by a few years. And I'm like, interesting. First you collect the data, right? And then you develop the system to utilize the data. And I just a data point, wanted to throw that out there, no pun intended, that, is there some intent to collect massive amounts of data, develop systems, get people reliant on them, reconfigure the global system to be essentially run on AI platforms and using artificial intelligence instead of human intelligence in ways that then a foreign human actor or a foreign non-human actor can much more readily influence. So I think, the acceleration of AI, the seeming lack of ability to manage its deployment and to responsibly test it before deploying it to society, this kind of like move fast and break things, Silicon Valley approach, I think is alarming. And if there's any non-human actor that would want to steer humanity, this is perfect for them. This is exactly what I would do if I were them. I would develop an information system that harvests, analyzes, and produces predictive models that then generate new information inside the human sphere and reconfigure all of humanity's systems on top of that platform. That's what I would do. So I think, it's an unknown, but it's an unknown known. It's something we know we don't know, and we need to begin to think about very carefully. All right, next question. What is your opinion on NHI interacting with different controls of power on the planet, China and Russia? Well, if you look at the record of UAP activity, there does seem to be an interest in power centers and in military defense settings, certainly humanity's military capabilities. That could be for multiple reasons. It could be observational. It could be an intent to intervene, to stop, for a variety of purposes. But I do find it alarming that it seems that whoever these entities might be, that they have chosen to engage these competing defense industries in ways that would only divide, that would only create suspicion and problems geopolitically. And there has not been an overt attempt. It's the archetypal White House lawn landing or the UN General Assembly presentation, right? Not that that would happen, but I don't see signs of an intent to engage in the nascent and meager, but still present centers of human collaborative power, where human beings come together to reconcile differences and negotiate down to common goals and to enact those together. So I see very little indication of an interest in these governing bodies. And so I do think it is alarming. I think it might indicate that there is an interest in going to where power is deployed presently in order to influence those power centers for non-human ends, according to non-human intent. And it makes total sense to me. That's what I would do. I do think that time will tell as to geopolitically what has really happened before the Cold War, during the Cold War, in the decade after the Cold War, and in the last decade. And the various conflicts that have erupted in the Middle East, the degradation of relations between Russia and the United States, and certainly the increasing power competition between China and the United States, that might prefer some outcome that an NHI might have. They might want to see us divided and distracted. They might prefer one political model that is maybe more hierarchical, more hive-like, less democratic, less open to discourse in way, because why? Liberal discourse is harder to control. Autocracy is a very efficient model if you have very little interest in human expression and creativity and some of these other high value items in the human experience. So, what would a non-human interest want to do among human interests? It's a question. Okay. And because I think we present to NHI and to the Exosystem Beyond a variety of potential models for how human life can be governed, organized, how economic systems can work. There is a variety of options that we present to them, and they are indigenous to us. And so which one of them is being selected for? I think that's a question we have to begin asking. Okay. What do you think about how advantageous it is for an organism to have adaptations that enable them to be deceptive? We see this throughout nature. Why wouldn't other species have far advanced capabilities in this area? Well, we see in our own species this adaptation toward deception, but we also see, and it's maybe an element of game theory, that left to work itself out over thousands of repetitions, pure deception and maliciousness is not selected for, it seems, in the formation of a viable ecosystem or an interspecies engagement. Maybe that trends towards annihilation, and there is some upward kick back towards finding ways of cohabiting and collaborating. So I don't doubt that that's probably the case, but I do think deception is widely employed, and to the degree that it can be employed psychically upon a species like our own that has no awareness of the psychic plane of existence and how that interfaces with us physically, biologically, biochemically, I think that creates a gold mine for the use of deception. Because if we knew that they were doing that, and then if we closed off relations, or if we shot them all down, or what have you, if we had those capabilities to respond with aggression to aggression, they might choose less aggressive tactics to engage us. But if we are demonstrating no ability or no intent to respond with natural aggression, aggression, by the way, is an adaptation, a very important one. Nature has selected for it. If you aggravate an animal, if you aggravate a human being, they should get aggressive. That's how you survive. Okay, so aggression, this whole love, fear, don't be aggressive thing, just bag that. So, if we're demonstrating zero adaptive response to them with aggression, or we have no capability to enact that aggression, no technological parity with them, no psi parity with them, I would say that that would tell them that they could get a lot done in this world through deceptive means. And to the degree to which they can keep it out of our perceptual range and undertake it psychically or neurologically or biochemically, I think that would make a lot of sense for them. Again, they don't want to aggravate and stir up the human bee's nest. We can enact force, we can defend ourselves, we can do some damage, but the more intelligent way would be to never even have us be aware that they are here, that they have presence, or that they are exerting power, presence and power upon us. To not even elevate, our heart rates and our stress hormones, and to keep us cattle in the field, essentially. That would be a very intelligent way to shape and sculpt and ultimately gain power in the world, I would see. This is where I think we need an NHI reading of The Art of War, Sun Tzu. Maybe we'll do that on a forthcoming episode of Emergent. All right. Is the attitude of closed countries like North Korea what humanity needs to prevent NHI from getting in? I'm not sure about that. I think political models like we see in North Korea present a considerable vulnerability to humanity. That there are countries that are disconnected from the global system, do not engage in treaty level agreements or respectful discourse with other countries, that are belligerent, xenophobic, conspiratorial, and that have leadership styles like they do, I think is a very great risk to us. It's like a wound that never heals. It's a trigger point that can always be activated in the human system. And if a nuclear confrontation were to occur, a limited one, which again would demonstrate human incompetence, possibly in the exosystem, which might justify certain NHI actions in response. North Korea could be a perfect state actor to trigger that set of events. So I think it's a thorn in the side of humanity that we have countries in that current state. I don't think we need to get to that level of ardent xenophobia regarding NHI or the exosystem. I think we need to consider, what are our human terms of engagement? What are the rules that any entity transiting our Earth exosystemic border must abide by? What are the potential models for international cooperative interaction and mediation of non-human intent? If they want something from this planet, what are the terms? Who decides on the terms? Should they even be allowed to petition us to get what they want, given past behavior? So I think we have to devise a whole human solution to the appearance of non-human intelligence, and it has to be at all levels of society. It's going to take a lot of effort, time. It's going to be a calling. Let me tell you that, for thousands of people, millions of people probably. And I think it needs to start and start soon. Thank you for your discernment and critical thinking with our emergence into a competitive non-human universe of intelligent life. Could you comment on how spiritual practice can connect? Everyone's got typos in their questions tonight. That's very interesting. What's up with that? I think that's interesting. Comment on how spiritual practice can connect with spirit within us, help us here. Okay. Well, I don't quite understand the question as it relates to NHI and the universe at large, but I think spiritual practice is essential. I'm a longtime spiritual practitioner myself and a meditator. I think there is a level of mind within us that, if we tap into it, can expand our intelligence dramatically and allow us a level of perception into another intelligence, non-human intelligence, in a way that our intellect would not achieve, in a way that our science would not decode. And so there could be a level of immediate, spontaneous perception, noetic perception, that allows us instant understanding of the intent of another. I think we've all experienced this potentially. You get around someone and you just know you just should not be around this person. Or you have a spontaneous understanding about what they're about to say before they say it, or what they really want and that they're not saying that they want, but that in the end you find out later that they did. We have this capability. I would say it's a part of our native intelligence. I don't think it's necessarily purely human. I think it could be a feature of all sentience. It might be vestigial in the sense that we have divorced ourselves from it in more modern times, or that it has to be developed from scratch in this manifest universe in which we live. So I think it's there. I think it could also be protective to the degree that we live inside and at the surface of a human intellect. I think the potential to be dominated by a more powerful intellect is going to be ever present as a potential risk. So if you can increasingly live proximal to what you might consider a divine layer of existence, or a truly spiritual nature that you might possess, there might be some protective force that can generate and emit, and that could actually be quite operational. So I don't know if you've ever encountered psychological interference, but to the degree that you invoke the power of spirit or a higher power or the angels, or whatever your whatever is inside the composition of your religious beliefs, there is a pretty immediate effect, positive effect. Why is that? Is it because these entities are scared away by it? Maybe. Is it because that force and power prevails underneath or above the manifest plane of existence, and can exert protective force upon it? Possible. I would say so. And so I employ that a lot in my life. And there's a whole spiritual side to the reality of encountering life in the universe that we could get into at a later date. What does this say about God? What does this say about humanity's centrality in the universe? What kind of cosmic divine narrative might we be a part of? And might this little earth that we live on, and this human family, this human genetic makeup that we share, could express and could constructively support? I think that's a whole other layer to this. So thanks for asking. How much are you influenced by your father's work? And if you weren't influenced by his work, what would your original observations and positions be? Well, my father's work is important to me. Of course, I grew up in my family, as did we all, and we all have influences. You can't not be influenced. You can't not have parts of your makeup that were conditioned, right, by society, culture, religion, family. And so I just want to say that out of the gate. I am inspired by his work. I have been informed by his work. And it has come to my awareness that there is a project at hand that belongs to the human species. It is a human cause in the universe to amplify humanity's capabilities to safely and securely steer this world forward through a variety of challenges, environmental challenges, societal challenges, growth and development, evolution. And I think NHI and contact with NHI is one, if not one of the biggest of those challenges. And so that's my inspiration. That's what I'm about. And there are many sources of inspiration that feed that recognition for me. All my time in the world, across many countries, all the thousands of people I've met, practitioners of almost every religion, wonderful human beings demonstrating the power of the human spirit and the potential of our species. To me, that's what I uphold. So that's what I'm working on. If I was not my father's son, what would my original observations and positions be? Well, that's a question I can't answer. But I'm honored to be my father's son. And my family's journey has been special. It has been challenging. It has been illuminating. And I wouldn't be here without it. And I wouldn't be able to offer what I can without it. So I'm in gratitude for it. But there is so much that inspires me. And I have many friends. I have many wells that I drink from in the world of intellectual resource, spiritual resource, experiential resource. It's been a fascinating life so far. So I take from it all. All right. Do you desire to have Matthew Pines on the show? I'd love to have Matthew Pines on the show. I've spoken to Matthew. He's a great guy, an amazing thinker. Yeah. So if that's Matthew asking for himself, I doubt it. If it's somebody else, let me know. I'd be happy to have Matt on, and we can talk all things policy, governance. He'll take me up and down the mountain on that, but I'll be along for the ride for sure. I'll happily go there. Okay, I'll take. Let's see, what do we have on time here? I'll take two more. We have a plethora of phenomena. We have heard of quite a few species. Insectoids and reptilians are some. This seems to have the potential for a very complicated web of connections from species to countries. What's the 40,000-foot view? Yes, I respect that question. And I know there is a lot of diversity in what's been reported. Not all of it comports to an extraterrestrial hypothesis or physical alien hypothesis. And I think we have to draw some lines around what we call this quote phenomenon. If we basically frame this as our adventure into consciousness and the nature of existence, we're not going to get very far in understanding UAP, nor the NHI interaction that apparently is happening in the world. So we have to draw some lines around it. On the question of multiple entity types, yes, I think it is a very, very challenging position to be the race that is discovered. Human history has taught us that it doesn't go well for the less advanced species. They don't decode intent. They do not parse the field of different players. They conflate spiritual emissaries with political emissaries. They transact their resources and their land. They imbibe non-native narratives, and they debase their own native narratives. It does not go well in this exchange between civilizations on behalf of the one that is less technologically advanced. So history tells us that, and that's a wake-up call. Certain solutions might present themselves to this dilemma of how on earth do we decode what could be a very complex playing field. One of those solutions is we need a human-enforced détente, cessation of interaction with NHI now, because it could be impossible to effectively decode all of these intentions and actually conclusively say that this is the good entity over here and that that's the bad one over there. I think we can potentially conclude that some entities might have a detrimental effect on us or a hostile intent with us, but those entities, possibly through telepathic or psychological means, technological means, could potentially easily comport themselves into a new shape, a new perceptual presentation, and then we think that that's the good one, and that yes, that was the bad one, but those are now redisplaying themselves in a new shape and form to us. So again, the potential for manipulation of perception is just so phenomenal that out of an abundance of caution and for our human interest, it may be time to require the removal of all these physical NHI who might be present in the world to a safe distance, at which time we can then re-engage on our terms with our frameworks built and our international governance established to mediate this contact, and ensure that we are doing so in our common human interest. So just continuing to engage with a phenomenon that is presenting deceptive signals, detrimental signals, potentially hostile signals, and to think that at some point we will finally be able to say, those are the good ones, we can trust and work with them, I think we might be kidding ourselves. So in all respect for the question, I think you're right. I think it is that complicated, a web of connections. And, stepping out into that exosystemic view, how does a adolescent world full of challenge and difficulty like our own, how do we develop the capability to function as an adult species in that complex web? For anyone who's the father or mother of a child, it's not easy. It's not guaranteed. And there are certain principles that I would say would be in place that would honor the agency of an entity, empower them to make their own decisions and build their own strength, and effectively, bring into being the qualities that they would need to be a full functional participant in the system. And I do not see that agency and those qualities and that space and respect being conferred upon the human species by and large in a variety of NHI encounters. And so it's almost like the rules of how relationship is best conducted in ways that are positive and beneficial for each party are not being honored by what I'm seeing in the phenomenon by and large. Not entirely, but by and large. And so that's a concern. So I think we need to look at that relationship dynamic. But, fundamentally, it's a return to what we need to do. We can make it all about them. They may want that. But really, this is about what we need to do as a human species. And so the project is Project Humanity. It's the human cause, and there's good work to be done, regardless of who's in our space and whether or not we can decode their full intent. So I'll stop there. Take one more here. Good questions. Colonialism, even though it was harsh, another typo, to natives had led to global civilization. Can we have such an analogy with alien visitation? Yes, I think we could. I could imagine a scenario in which we are engaged, we are influenced to function within the exosystem, that technology is introduced, that information is introduced, that the thought landscape is altered in ways that allow us to collaborate, right? To play our part. The only problem is that exosystemic reality may not be anything like we enjoy in this purportedly stable world we have today. It might be a consortium of prison planets. It might be a consortium of hive organizations in which creativity and spiritual expression are uncommon than more common. We don't know. And so, just to say, well, let's work with them and let's do what they say, and I'm sure we'll take our part. Well, that's a complete assumption, right? We may not exist in the course of that. And in fact, for many native societies, they don't exist. It's actually quite rare to see an original native society which had its own indigenous, organic, cultural and political expression pre-colonization, still in existence with their language intact, their rituals and practices still practiced. It's not common. And so, eradication is the norm in these interspecies interactions in the human context. Is that the norm in the intraspecies context of exopolitical or exosystemic affairs? Don't know. So I'm not yet sure I want to take my part in the, quote, global civilization equivalent of an exosystem civilization. We don't know enough about what it's like out there. And we might need some help in understanding what that exosystem is like. There might have to be some onboarding to it, because we don't have the detection or the sensing capabilities to analyze it ourselves, nor can we necessarily trust just about anything that's said to us, especially by those who are physically present in the world interacting with us. So it's a tricky situation. But yes, think of the native analogy. It's not to say that the universe marches to the beat of human history and the human expression. What it is to say, though, is that the universe gave rise to us. We are a sentient life form that arose in this universe. Therefore, the natural principles and dynamics that gave rise to us would probably be at play elsewhere and might have given rise to others. We are the one sentient species we can analyze closely and intimately, and have already done so with. And we have done so across many different civilizations, many different expressions of sentient life in the human context. And also, some of what we express as sentient humans maps on top of what other life forms have expressed as non-sentient life on Earth. And so there are fundamental dynamics at play in terms of the competition for environment and resources, adaptation, the arising of adaptive traits that are selected for, that are then reproduced and replicated, and that die off is a common scenario in the biological world. So we should just be apprised of that. That happened in this universe. I think it could happen elsewhere. And so it's not to say that the human expression dictates what non-human intelligence would express, but it is a sign and symptom of the dynamic forces of the universe and of nature. Well, folks, this was a great conversation. Thank you so much. Before I leave you, I want to share with you some exciting news. I will be offering my course starting next Wednesday at 7 o'clock Eastern. Put this up on screen. And this is my course, Decoding Alien Intent. I developed this for the New Paradigm Institute. They had a parting of ways with Ubiquity University. My course is no longer available, as are a bunch of other courses not available. So I thought it was time that I just offered this to the public. This is free and open to all. Scroll through this here. We're going to be engaging in a high-level overview of the UAP UFO phenomenon and identifying key capabilities we have to make a structured analysis of the observation that we can make toward making a starting assessment of NHI motive, intent, and involvement in the world. With a starting assessment, you then narrow the field of possibilities to probabilities that you can then pursue further with more targeted data collection or analysis and so forth, and begin to get to something more of a working conclusion regarding what is taking place in the world. That's the 40,000 foot view question that was asked. We all need our 40,000 foot view assessment of this. Without that, you can't act. You can't do anything. And if nobody acts, if nobody proposes key actions for humanity, then humanity doesn't respond. And we're in this stasis where we're forever students of the phenomenon. It's paralysis by analysis, and more decades go by, and this unknown, undisclosed, covert operation of NHI continues in ways that we don't understand. And guess what? We'll wake up and we'll have a different world someday. May not be the world that we want. So it is getting very high time for humanity to respond in some fashion to this interaction that is occurring. And what is needed for that are people like yourself, myself. I would call us forerunners, and I'll get to that in a minute. But the future needs forerunners on this issue. And my course is something I'll be offering to empower you to make your own assessment and to begin to move down the road, the cognitive road of getting out of confusion and pure speculative theorizing to something of a solid position from which you can move on the issue and propose action, involve yourself with others, collaborate on key projects. That's what needs to be going on. So that's my course, Decoding Alien Intent. 4 live sessions over 8 weeks. and free and open to all. I definitely encourage you to get in there and be a part of that. And then stemming from that, my other update to share is in order to host this course and other educational opportunities, I will be launching a community platform called Forerunner. Forerunner is a place where people can go to talk about their assessment of NHI, their use of the evidence, and their other key human capabilities to effectively analyze the phenomenon and come to some statement of purpose for themselves regarding it, and to begin to propose key actions that we would take individually or collectively. Forerunner will be launching, I hope, next week, and it will be hosting the Decoding Alien Intent course. So in order to get into the course, you're going to have to get over to Forerunner, and in the course section of the site, I'll be hosting some discussions and making the opportunity for you to create your own discussions on how to implement the key concepts of the course. And then the other part of the site that I'll be launching, I'm calling Emergent Discussions. With each show, I'm going to be initiating certain key conversations for us to have over a 2-week period. And so don't have it ready yet, but I will at the next show. Certain conversations that we can take forward asynchronously on the site and really engage our intellect, our reasoning processes, engage our human knowledge base. What do we know from various domains of human knowledge that we could apply to a key question about NHI, about disclosure, or about our human response to all of this? So that'll be on Forerunner. I'll be announcing that next week. Hope you can get in there and be a part of that. With that, I want to thank you for being here with me and giving me the chance to shake off the rust as I get back into the hot seat of Emergent and into the new year to come. So a lot to come with the show and a lot of great guests and show topics I'll be sharing with you. So please feel free to hit me up at my website and my email here, which I have on screen in a second. Oh, no, I don't. Never mind. info@reedsummers.com. Feel free to send me an email. And with that, I will sign off. Thank you much and be well.